This not only trip, but movement to lift economic sanctions on China for chip and chip-related technologies is what I consider to be a genuinely seminal event in the relationship between China and the United States over the last 12 months. For the past 4 years or thereabouts, under the previous Biden administration, there was a policy with regard to China of containment. There were concerns over China's ongoing development, especially in technology, and the then Biden administration believed that the best course of action was to, as they referred to it, build a small garden but a high fence, meaning to put on essentially a weaponization of trade, where they would focus, meaning the Biden administration would focus on those areas they believed were of great importance to the Chinese, and then limit the amount of access that China would have to whatever those high-end technology elements might be. Central to this, at the core of this entire policy, was the company NVIDIA and Jensen Huang, who happens to be an American-born Chinese. He speaks a little bit of Chinese, but he is really a rock star. I guess the best way to sort of describe him is the Steve Jobs of our time. And roughly 2 or 3 years ago, NVIDIA had what was not their highest end, most powerful chip, but it was called the H20, and the Biden administration demanded of NVIDIA to cease all exports of the H20 to China. What I find fascinating, however, is this policy was actually continued under the Trump administration during the first several months of his presidency, just earlier this year. And there were 2 rounds of negotiations with the Chinese over various elements of trade, particularly tariffs. There was one meeting in Switzerland where everybody believed the parties had reached some degree of agreement. It was clear that no agreement had been made, and it forced the parties to then meet again in Switzerland just last month. What I think is very fundamental and very illustrative of that Switzerland meeting is, number one, the meeting was essentially required because China had made the decision to put on a full export control on what were referred to as rare earths and rare earth magnets, which were very essential to the American economy. Those rare earths and those batteries were stopped, and it had an immediate impact. That is what then caused the London meeting to take place. And what was quite fascinating was, after the meeting occurred, there was very little detail that had come out from the American side with regard to what was the quid pro quo. Everybody knew that the Chinese had agreed in the London meeting that they would resume the export of rare earths and magnets, but nobody knew what was it that the Americans were going to deliver. Well, we now know. Even though there has not been any formal confirmation out of Washington, it was all of the chip and chip-related technology export bans that the Americans had put on over the last several years. It began with chip technology from the likes of Siemens and I believe another company called Synopsys, but the real big one was Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, and the H20 chip. So there was a really clear combination of both the Trump administration announcing that, okay, we're going to allow China access to these high-end chips. There's an argument that is being made that the H20 chip is not necessarily NVIDIA's most powerful chip, which is accurate. But at the same time, it's a demonstration that some form of agreement can be reached by the parties. Again, this is why I continue to press that dialogue, exchange, conversations, meetings. This is what will make the relationship between China and the United States far better. So not just was the H20 allowed to be sold into China again, but Jensen himself flew over. He attended this supply chain summit up in Beijing. He was all over the news. He received essentially rock star status. And I think that this is just a positive. And more importantly, I think it's just the beginning. I've commented elsewhere about a grand bargain that China and the United States can achieve. This is certainly one element of that. And we'll see over the course of the next several months what transpires, but it is without question positive, even though we have seen a fair number of headlines out of America commenting on how this is not in the best interest of the American people. I disagree, but again, it's good that there is dialogue and there are results that are coming out of these various meetings.